The last time Clara Harwood saw the family orchard, the trees were dying, and her mother was already buried. Now, 20 years later, the trees were in full bloom but everything else was rotting beneath the surface. Clara stood at the edge of Harwood Estate, the gravel drive crunching under her boots, the early spring wind brushing through the branches of apple trees that had once been her childhood sanctuary. White blossoms fluttered through the air like forgotten letters from a past that never forgave. She hadn't planned to come back, not after the way they cast her out like a weed choking their precious name. Not after her father, Arthur Harwood, had thrown her out at 18 for refusing to follow his commands, for daring to pursue a life outside his perfectly mapped dynasty. He told her she'd never inherit a single acre. He told her she was dead to him, and so she stayed dead until the funeral. Arthur Harwood was gone, found slumped in his study, his prized hunting rifle fallen at his feet. Stroke, the doctors said. But the real poison had always been pride, and with his death came the will. A will that should have been simple. But Harwoods never did anything simple. Clara wasn't mentioned. Not once. Not even to my estranged daughter. Her name was a ghost. The estate land, business, orchards, and the multi-million-dollar Harwood Reserve Distillery was handed in full to her younger half-brother Julian. Julian, the boy born to Arthur's second wife. The boy Arthur paraded like a second chance at perfection. The one who'd inherited Clara's room, Clara's horses, Clara's birthright. Julian, who had called her a bastard behind closed doors. Julian, who now stood on the porch of the estate with a smirk as Clara arrived for the reading. Even though there was nothing left to read, I told them you wouldn't be able to resist sniffing around, he said coolly, sipping whiskey in the daylight. Nostalgia or delusion? Which one brought you home? Clara smiled, not because she was amused, but because she already knew what he didn't. I'm just here to say goodbye, she said. To him? Julian scoffed. Or to your fantasy of ever belonging here? She didn't answer, because revenge, like the best Harwood whiskey, needed time to age. Clara spent the night in the old caretaker's cottage, the only place on the property Julian hadn't gutted or remodeled. She walked the orchard in the moonlight, fingers trailing across the bark of the trees she once named as a girl. In her mind she heard her mother's voice, soft and sure. The roots remember, even when people forget. That night, she opened the leather-bound box her mother had left her before she died untouched until now. Inside were photographs, love letters, and a legal document Clara had never seen before, a copy of Arthur's first will, signed 15 years ago. It left everything to Clara. The orchard, the estate, the distillery, all hers. There was a handwritten note from her mother tucked beside it. He changed it after Julian was born. But this one was the truth, the one he meant. I kept a copy, just in case the trees ever needed you again. Clara's hands trembled as she read it over and over. Julian's inheritance was real, but it had been built on a rewritten truth. A legacy rewritten by power, not intention. And suddenly Clara knew. This wasn't about getting back what was stolen. This was about reclaiming what was planted in her name. The next morning, Clara took a slow walk through the distillery grounds like a guest in her own family's past. She noticed every new addition Julian had made: glass walls, modern tanks, motion sensor lights. It all looked expensive. It also looked hollow. Arthur's distillery had once been known for its heart hand-pressed apples, small batch barrels, flavors rooted in the land and the legacy. Now it looked like a showroom, sanitized, soulless, but the name still held weight. Harwood Reserve, and Clara still held something more powerful than nostalgia proof. She scanned the old will again that afternoon, then took it to Eloise Meyer, the family's former attorney, long retired, but still sharp. Eloise had been a quiet supporter of Clara's mother, and she welcomed Clara with a long-said smile. I always wondered when you'd come back, she said. I wasn't supposed to, Clara replied, but I think the orchard called me. Eloise, read the will carefully. Then again, her lips pursed. This is authentic. Your father's signature, his handwriting, notarized. This could challenge everything. But it's not the most recent version, Clara said. No, Eloise agreed. But if you can prove he was coerced into changing it, or manipulated after Julian's birth, or if the second will omitted you out of undue influence, then we have a case. Clara leaned back, thoughtful. What if I don't want court? Eloise raised an eyebrow. Then you want leverage. Clara nodded. I don't want his money, she said. I want to watch everything Julian built on lies collapse. She began slowly. First, she spoke to the orchard workers, men and women who had been with the family for decades. Some remembered her. Others simply watched her with cautious curiosity. Old Mrs. Granger, now nearly 80, still tended the southern fields. She took Clara's hand in both of hers and whispered, "We always thought you'd come back. He just wouldn't let you." Mrs. Granger then told her something even more useful. Arthur had drafted the revised will when Julian was just 3 and heavily medicated following a surgery. Victoria, Julian's mother, had insisted on the update and had the lawyers rush it through while Arthur was still in recovery. That detail stuck with Clara. It was a seed. She paid the local registrar for the hospital records. They confirmed Arthur had been on opioids and sedatives the week the second will was signed. It wasn't definitive proof of coercion, but it was doubt, and doubt, in the right hands, was fire. Next, Clara approached Noah Strickland, the orchard's longtime accountant, a quiet man who had been with the company since before Julian could walk. She asked him for a meeting. He agreed out of respect. He said, "For your mother." When she brought up the will, he stiffened. "I don't want to get involved." "You already are," Clara said calmly. "The real question is, do you want to be on the wrong side when this hits daylight?" Noah hesitated, then sighed. "I've seen the numbers. Julian's borrowed against next year's production. Twice. He's overspending investing in expansion deals he can't cover. If there's a disruption in the brand, he'll go under." Clara smiled. "That's all I needed to know." She sent Julian a letter. No drama. No threats. Just one line and a copy of the first will. "I suggest we talk before this becomes public knowledge." He arrived at the caretaker's cottage that night. In a fury, "You think a dusty old piece of paper gives you the right to threaten me?" Clara stayed calm. "No, Julian, the truth does." He tossed the document onto the table. "You're bluffing." "I'm not. And I have the hospital records, the witnesses, even your mother's signature pressuring the staff to fast track everything while Dad was drugged." Julian's jaw clenched. "If this goes to court," Clara said, "you'll lose the brand, the land, and what little credibility you have left in the whiskey world." He looked at her like a man seeing a ghost he couldn't exorcise. "What do you want?" He spat. She stood, brushing dust from her palms. "I don't want your title. I want the truth restored. Publicly." "No way. Then I'll burn it all," she said, voice steady. "And I'll grow something better from the ashes." Julian didn't answer Clara's ultimatum, not with words anyway. But within 48 hours, a corporate press release appeared on the Harwood Reserve website. "In honor of our founder's true legacy, the Harwood family is pleased to welcome Clara Harwood back into the company as co-director and heritage consultant for orchard development and brand restoration." Co-director, heritage consultant, carefully chosen words that masked the truth. Clara now had equal authority, and Julian had taken his first public step into surrender. The media ate it up. Articles titled "Forgotten Daughter Returns to Lead." Family empire surfaced, lauding the bold and inclusive move. Investors applauded the optics. Brand loyalty surged. Internally, the board murmured with cautious approval. Julian played it cool in meetings, smiled for photos, even shook Clara's hand at the first new product launch. But behind his eyes, the rage simmered, because no matter how carefully he played the part, he knew he hadn't welcomed her back. He'd been cornered. Clara took her place not with fanfare, but with presence. She changed nothing at first. She didn't fire anyone, didn't make sweeping reforms. She simply listened. She walked the orchards every morning, spoke to the workers, sat with the blenders and bottlers, asked questions no one had asked in years, and then she began. She reinstated the original Harwood press process for their signature apple blend ditched by Julian for speed and efficiency. She worked with local growers Arthur had severed ties with. She created a small legacy line with hand-signed labels, and Clara's mother's sketch of the orchard printed on the bottle. It sold out in 6 hours. For the first time in decades, Harwood Reserve didn't just look profitable. It felt personal. Again, Julian predictably pushed back. "She's dragging us backward," he told the board. "Artisanal lines? Heritage outreach? We're not a boutique brand, we're global." "She's profitable," the CFO replied, showing the numbers. "And your expansion deals are bleeding us dry." Clara didn't need to gloat. She just handed in her next phase proposal, restoring the Harwood archives. a long-forgotten collection of journals, letters, and land deeds from the original orchard founders, including Clara's great-grandfather. The board approved it unanimously. Julian stormed out of the meeting. That night, Clara returned to the caretaker's cottage, the moonlight silver on the windows. She brewed tea and pulled out one of her mother's old journals. Inside was a note she hadn't noticed before. They think legacies are inherited, but they're grown, watered, pruned. Let them call you the past, Clara. The roots. Remember who planted the first seed. She stared at it for a long time, because that was what Julian never understood. He had inherited the name, but Clara? She had inherited the heart. Word began to spread beyond the family. Old partners reached out. Former clients who'd turned away from Julian's cold corporate vision began expressing interest again because of Clara. Media outlets started requesting interviews. An independent documentary team asked to profile the orchard under her leadership. That was the tipping point. Julian snapped. He called an emergency board meeting, trying to push a vote to limit Clara's authority, citing unauthorized media attention and disruption of legacy branding. It backfired. The board, now fully in her favor, voted instead to remove Julian from daily operations. He could keep his title, but Clara would oversee all brand decisions and operational strategy. Going forward, Julian didn't attend the next week's meeting. He was too busy drowning his legacy in whiskey he no longer controlled. The following spring, Harwood Reserve held its first Founders Festival in nearly 2 decades, a celebration of orchard history, heritage craft, and the people who had grown the brand from dirt and sweat. It wasn't Julian's idea. It never would have been. But it was Clara's. She walked the grounds as families roamed beneath the blooming trees. Children painted barrels with watercolor. Old orchard workers gave tours of the heirloom rows. And on the main stage, beneath a hand-carved sign that read, "Planted in Legacy, Grown by Truth," Clara stood with her shoulders back and voice steady. "I came back here because something had been lost," she told the crowd. Not just land, not just a name, but something deeper: honor, memory, and the soul of what we build when we say the word family. She looked out at the crowd, not seeking applause, but planting understanding. "My father built the bones of this place, but my mother gave it its heartbeat, and it was nearly silenced. But today, it beats again, because the roots remember." The crowd stood. The orchard echoed with applause. Clara stepped down quietly. She didn't want to be famous. She just wanted the truth to grow. In the weeks that followed, she initiated a partnership with local cooperatives and launched an apprenticeship program for small-scale orchardists. She renamed the estate's oldest building the Emma House in honor of her mother and turned it into a permanent heritage museum and tasting room. Visitors lined up to walk its halls, and Julian, he moved out of the estate. He retained a minor stake in the company, enough to keep him tied to its name but without influence. He was last seen in a downtown office trying to launch his own brand. It failed before the first press run. Investors no longer believed in a legacy built on ego, because now, the Harwood name meant something different. Clara, late one evening, as dusk painted the orchard in gold and fire, Clara walked the southern row, the one her mother loved most. The trees were heavy with first blossom, the air thick with the scent of earth and memory. She knelt beside the oldest tree, the one with a heart carved into its trunk from decades ago. From her pocket, she pulled the last item in her mother's box, a handwritten recipe, the very first apple blend her mother created. She pressed it to the soil and smiled. "I found it," she whispered. "Everything you buried, everything they tried to erase. I brought it home." The wind stirred the petals. The orchard rustled softly in reply, and beneath the trees, Clara Harwood, daughter of the past, voice of the present, and seed of the future, finally stood, not as someone who returned for revenge, but as the woman who planted a new beginning.